and be able to help you out. So without further ado, would love for you, Luca, to maybe just introduce yourself, give us a little bit about your background, and we'd love to hear about what Oasis is building.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, happy to be here. My name's Luca and I work at Oasis. I joined Oasis Labs 2 years ago when the team was extremely small. We just fundraised and we scaled the team since there. My background has been in larger companies. I came from Google, American Express, and Procter and Gamble, and then I moved to the um, Bay Area for an MBA at UC Berkeley, where I got in touch with one of the founders at Oasis Labs, and I had a similar idea around doing privacy preserving computation somehow, but from a much less technical angle. And I was so lucky that I met these incredible people who were working on this very good technology. Um, so yeah, I've been there since.
Very cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing. So you were working at these large enterprises. How did you get into, cryptocurrency and blockchain, and like what really drew that to you? Was it working with Don at UC Berkeley, or kind of what drove that?
No, like in 2012 or 13, I was doing one of my first internships at American Express before I got there full time. And I was starting reading something about Bitcoin without doing like, without knowing much about the technical side, but more of like, what is this? What is this like medium of exchange? What are people doing with that? Why is it raising in value a little bit? Um, and I think at that time, like the conversion with the dollar was around $200 or $300, something like that. And it looked like extremely high because people did not understand what was going on. So it was like at the bottom right corner of some publication online. And I asked my VPs there, can I spend a little bit of time like researching into this thing? I didn't even know how to call it because that's like the definition was unclear at the time. And they told me, of course, like, no, that's a little bit more than a video game. It's going to drop. It's not going to be anything. And honestly, like I made probably the biggest mistake of my professional life, which was like trusting these people blindly, simply because they had 20, 30 years of experience in payments. And I thought like they must know. I like the job title they have immediately made me assume that they knew everything. Um, and yeah, and since then I said, you know what, I'm gonna like just play with a couple of these. Then like it was an up and down. It was extremely hard to maintain like a personal life without thinking of this like movement. So I decided to take a step back for a little bit. And then like after I started going a little bit more into the technical side of blockchain in general, like smart contracts. Ethereum white paper came out that was much more interesting. And then like the big shift happened when I moved to UC Berkeley. I always wanted to be this type of person who can sit in between the business side of things and the technical side of things. So I surrounded myself with engineers, and clearly blockchain was very, very hyped at the time. And that naturally prompted me into like reading more and reading more and reading more. And then I started seeing the potential. I did a couple of, I don't even want to call them like part-time engagement, but like some sort of, I started helping people who were working in the space and noticed what potential it had. And I started loving this idea of solving some of the problems that I had in my previous companies like Google, Amex, etc., with respect of data. And I said, wait, there is something in here. Let me start thinking whether this makes sense or not. And I literally reached out to Dawn without knowing that Dawn was working on something like that. She was just the expert of this field at Berkeley. And it turned out that she was working on a very similar idea, but she was working on clearly like the more technical thing. And I was thinking of more product things. And like that match seemed very natural at the time. So I ended up joining her team right after.
Very cool. Yeah. Thanks for sharing your background and kind of how you got into everything. That's really exciting. Impressive background too. And so kind of diving into Oasis. So I know that you guys are a big part of DeFi and becoming more. So what is Oasis, and what is Oasis's approach to DeFi?
Yeah. Oasis is at its core, Oasis is a layer one blockchain. we are building our own protocol, we're building our own network. And at our, like our core sort of technology is this idea of creating smart contracts that keep the data private and confidential. And what this means is that in blockchain, you hear a lot of transparency and like information is shared across the network, but despite this is bringing a lot of benefits around coordination and around encouraging participation of players and community, at the same time is preventing like large institutions or even like some people is preventing those entities from actually joining the industry, because it's kind of unrealistic to expect that everything is going to turn transparent. Um, and and so like what we want is, we said, okay, wait a second, we can leverage what we learned from the market to add what's missing. And what's missing is this ability of not sacrificing whatever computation in favor of privacy and not sacrificing protection of the data in favor of computation. So we created this third option, which is you can still do computation and take advantage of your data and benefit from accessing your data or partners' data. But accessing data for some level of computation doesn't necessarily mean that the data has to be transferred and has to be revealed. And the cool part of this is that really, in most of the cases that we want to tackle, like there's no compromise, because you are interested in the output of your computation. You're not necessarily interested in the raw data. So either because of protection or because of compliance or because of business reasons, you can still keep the data in one side and get the output that you want. And that's like, I think it's amazing because it really creates a paradigm shift, in the sense that there is something that wasn't possible before and now it's possible. What we're doing in DeFi, I think comes directly from this idea that privacy is really an enabler and not a way to hide information. That has nothing to do with what we're doing, has nothing to do with hiding information or privacy coins. Like, it's a completely different story. The point is, there are commercial interests, there are relationships that need to be protected, and we want to like allow for that. As simple as that. In the DeFi specifically, we think DeFi is having a lot of momentum now, but we also think that like the real adoption of DeFi will be when this new financial system will be built with the premise that it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what geography you're born in, it doesn't matter what status or what's your wealth. It depends on if you can respect a series of rules. And if we can enable that through privacy and through confidentiality of the data, through a better scalability, lower transaction fees, through an identity system that allows users to build their identity via composing pieces of information together and then selectively sharing this information when needed. I think if we combine all these pieces, this financial service, this new financial system, it's possible. And that's where we're heading towards.
Awesome. Yeah. I think privacy, is going to be huge in order to be able to, take this to the next level of everything that we're seeing grow. What parts of Chainlink is kind of helping you enable this privacy, and how are you helping enable? How is it helping you enable your DeFi products?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the most amazing part of the partnership that we're building with Chainlink is that when I think of Oasis, I think of data, and I think of how data is empowering a new series of applications. Some of them are related to decentralized finance. Some of them are related to record sharing. And some of them are related to taking data from one place, using this data, and then like sort of dismissing the data if you don't need it anymore. And I think Chainlink is bridging this idea that we have with the real data sources that exist here and there in the market. So the missing part is that the data lives in many different places right now. And building these connectors with all these data points, and that happens to be centralized in most cases, and so gameable to some extent. I think like Chainlink is helping with, I think Chainlink will actually play a crucial role there in bridging all these micro pieces together I see this as a central place where there are all bridges, and Chainlink is this bridge with all these like different territories, and each of these territory actually has some valuable data that someone in the center is interested in using. And Chainlink is fundamental piece of this architecture, because without these bridges, this core technology will have to suffer more, because the developers that want to build this like applications in this center, they'll have to build these bridges themselves. And I think like Chainlink is doing an amazing job and first of all, understanding, like listening to the market and understanding what are the relevant data sources that should be prioritized. That's an incredible value for everyone. The second piece is that is standardizing, maybe not the format of the data, because it's not necessarily easy and possible given the speed at which data moves, but mostly the format at which you can connect to these data sources. And then the third part is like ensuring that that connection has the lowest possible chances of being somehow like gamed or like removing every single point of failure from these bridges. And I think that has been like an incredible value for us. Now, the second part of this incredible aspect of this partnership is that once you can access these data sources that live in multiple places, there is something more you can do, right? You can tokenize this data, and data is no longer like a database, but it becomes a unit, right? Now now all of a sudden, thanks to our technology and thanks to Chainlink, we have a unit. Like the data can be expressed as a unit. And what this means is that it can be quantified. It could be moved around in many different places at the same time, because Chainlink ensures that the data is correct and the data source is trusted and all those things. I mean, more than trusted, I'd say is credible. All those things. Oasis tokenizes this data and makes it ubiquitous, so you can use it in multiple places at the same time. And the controller of this packet becomes the user. And then so many things can be possible from this point, because all of a sudden the data has become a recognizable asset that can be priced, that can be shared, that can be invested, that can generate some return, that can generate some payout, and that can generate some competitive advantage for the user when it comes, for instance, not to refill the information for the nth time, but perhaps like enabling a third-party application to take some data points and build some models on top of this data for the purpose of that application. So I paused it here because it was a long answer, but I hope I give a broader sense of what's possible and why we're building this partnership.
No, that was excellent. And yeah, thanks a lot for sharing. With your previous background, do you see like some of these as kind of the missing pieces of that kind of misinformation of before, maybe like the misunderstanding, and ways that it can kind of drive some of the centralized platforms of payments kind of forward, and kind of missing these like data points as you're talking about it and being able to connect those?
Well, definitely. Like I mean, accessing data is like doesn't have a limit, right? There's no ceiling for what you can do with data. So there's always going to be a new data source or a new data collaboration or a new partnership based on data. Like there's always going to be something new around data, because and this is one of the things that like when we say data is the new oil, or when the economy said data is the new oil back in time, I always thought that was only a partial like answer, because I have one barrel of oil and I get a second one, and now I have two barrels of oil. Like they somehow, like you add them and they don't, there's no like network effect, right? They don't grow more than proportionally to the number of barrels that you put. But with data points, if you and I bring our data together, the value increases more than the sum of the data, right? So this is something that I think is extremely important to keep in mind when we consider the value of building new data partnership, or the value of accessing a new data source, because adding one data point or adding one data source or adding one view to the data that you already have brings like exponentially more value to that. So I definitely saw some gaps in my previous companies, and I've seen gaps of any type. Like either there could be gaps where there was not enough data and there would have been a need for accessing more data, but by the time you sign a partnership, by the time you find the agreement, by the time you go through all the steps like legal, quality, technical integration, and then actual understanding of the data set and all those things, like the data is old and you don't want it anymore, to the other way around, which is, you're in a rush, give us an answer, and there's going to be a team that doesn't have any contact with you, who's going to approve your data request, and hoping that things will go like the right way, but not having any idea of why you should get access to that. So I've seen gaps everywhere, both in the opportunities that can be unlocked and in the actual like security trade-off that you need to make in order to be able to capture that opportunity. And that happens at like the bigger the company, the more gaps I've seen, let's say.
Very cool. Yeah. I'm fascinated with the research and the work that you are doing at Oasis. And as I was kind of reading more on your website and everything that you guys are doing, you kind of have this phrase, the responsible data economy. And so what exactly does Oasis mean by that phrase as we're talking here about data?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we are very like responsible data economy means essentially two things in our view. So there is the responsible part and there is the economy part. Data is clear to everyone. So the responsible part is that the way products are designed right now, maybe it's mainly consumer products, I'd say, they really start from the idea that users do not care about data, right? So as long as these products tick the compliance box and do the bare minimum not to end up on bad press, let's say, they consider themselves fine. On the flip side, users are not given the option of really like protecting their data because the cost of doing that is massive and the benefit of doing that is really like close to zero. It's sort of like I feel good about clicking that I don't accept cookies, but reality is like I don't care. It depends on how big the pop-up is and how fast I want to get rid of that, but that's it. Now there must be more than that, right? There must be a situation where let me say this, like in addition, the weird part of this imbalance that you see on the web everywhere, and even in the physical world, let's say, is that companies spend a lot of money to either secure the data, protect the data, buy new data, do whatever they want. Like accessing new data costs companies a lot of money, either through new products or through partnerships. And the users almost kind of like dismiss the value of the data because they're not given any way to do anything differently. And it's very weird that the data is the same, right? But the two sides of this equation price the data extremely differently. And this is something that we deem as a big inefficiency in the market, not really just from a fairness standpoint, but really from the opportunities that are lost and that are left on the table because of the absence of a mechanism to build database collaborations between the users and the companies. Let me try to be a little bit more specific here. Let's say that, like, without going into obvious examples, but I think sometimes obvious examples help and like make things easier. Let's say that you don't want to be on Facebook, right? And you say, I want to protect my data. I say, like, fine, you can like avoid being on Facebook. But the cost of doing that is extremely high, right? The cost of not being on Facebook is extremely high. The cost of paying cash instead of your credit card is extremely high, and so on and so forth. And I noticed this thing that because users are not given any opportunity to care about their data, users don't care about their data. And because users don't care about their data, product people or product builders do their own research and they conclude that people don't care about data. And as a consequence of that, they design a product that doesn't have any that already incorporates the assumptions that the users don't care about data. Now, there is a historical trend when it comes to privacy of noticing that it's true that people don't care about data or about privacy in general, right? When a new product comes out. So you can go back to like thousands of years when people were like I read that people were having sex in public, and then when rooms were created, they switched to rooms, right? And like thousand years later, it's the same thing with the telephone. Like there's so many examples in between, but let's say even a more recent example is the telephone. At the very beginning, the telephone was this big machine put in this like big room, and everyone was using the telephone no matter what. But then when someone invented the headphones as a primary way not to be listened in these big rooms, everyone switched to the headphones, right?
Mhm.
So now I think we are in that phase where people jumped on a lot of these like credit cards and like every data generator without thinking of the privacy aspect of that. But now everyone is started to like process that information differently than before. And so everyone is moving into that direction. So the responsible data economy wants to capture this feeling of, wait a second, there has to be a better way to enable a collaboration between the company and the user, instead of having this behavior where at the beginning companies give you everything to attract you and then take everything out of you because they become too important for you. There has to be a third option. There has to be an option where the relationship between the user and the company is actually created around data and around the beautiful part of the product, of course, but like the data can be this asset that the users own and that the company pay for, right? So the user is happy to stay with the company because there is a trusted relationship that is financially like incentivized on top of the product, benefit on top of the benefits that the product brings. And the company is interested in paying the user A to retain that user, and B to access that information. And that creates a much more or like a longer lasting relationship between these two entities. So we can tokenize that, like the idea that we can tokenize the data, express it as a unit, allow the user to control the data, and then potentially invest the data, stake the data. And on the other side, there is a company that can borrow that data and buy that data and pay for that data. This is what we call the responsible data economy. This is what we call this new movement that we think people are starting to have in mind no matter what. We consider ourselves an enabler here. We don't have an aspiration of educating the entire world. I don't think that's possible. I think we're doing nothing more than capturing the state of the market. Like I don't know if you read on press a couple of days ago. I think either yesterday or the day before, we announced this amazing partnership with Nebula Genomics, which is this company that says, wait a second, genomics data is yours. It should be yours. We want to use Oasis to put your data, like the result of the DNA test is going to be stored in a place that you have control of. You can give us access, you can give us permission to query the data and sort of like do some computation and tell you what the numbers are and all the outputs that you want. But not because of that, that means that we can transfer your data and do whatever we want with that. So Nebula is not going to see our data. It's not going to see like the user's data. The user retains control. And essentially, there's no future sacrifice there. There's no sacrifice at all when it comes to what's possible with the data. The only sacrifice is that Nebula is taking an important like stand in saying, you know what, we won't be able to sell your data without your permission. And that's like fairness. That's responsible data economy that creates the right incentives for the three entities, user, Oasis, and Nebula in this case, to actually base an entirely new value proposition on this idea that the data can be treated as an asset. And because of this reason, it has to be treated as a responsible data economy.
Very cool. Yeah, no, the economics behind this data problem is very fascinating. I think that's really why, you know, like the network effects are so important, because it is marginal gains for, you know, a social media to securely hold someone, give the power of the data back to the user. The user just wants this working product. But what's really going to cost that company is, when that user leaves for another platform, and that cost is really high until there's a lot of other people. So no, it's very, very interesting what you guys are working on, and very cool. I know there's some questions in the chat, and people are really interested to hear, more about this layer one solution, and, how does it help with scalability of all this? If we're working with, social medias and data in general, like you're going to need something very scalable. How does Oasis Network work, and what is your solution to this?
Yeah. So first of all, like there's when we think of scalability means like it's often expressed as transactions per second only, but we sort of think that this is kind of an imperfect metric, because executing a transaction, which is me sending money to you, is very different from building a deep learning model on a complex data set, on a huge data set, right? It's a completely different story. So we think that our scalability should be good for both complex, or should account for both complexity of the transaction and speed of the, like, number of transactions, again, like speed of the execution. And we want to be top right corner, meaning we want to be high on both, because we think that that's the way to gain adoption, and that's the way that blockchain will be an enabler for something that's not possible today in the current state without trusting central parties. So I want to make this clarification, because I think this is one of the things that has been less noticed about our network, and I think is actually one of our main points of distinction, and I think that's important. So on how we achieve that, essentially we separated the three layers of consensus, storage, and computation, and we parallelized the operations there. So instead of executing one after the other one, we are parallelizing the operations there. And this also comes with the benefit of being able to scale each layer independently, which has its own advantage, because it allows to decide like what is the best architecture for the applications that developers want to build, or at least for the group of applications that developers want to build. And we also have multiple runtimes that are possible to be spun off our network. We call them paratimes. So for instance, there could be one that is like native, like the main Oasis one. There could be one that is EVM compatible. There is already someone that has built that and is public. I encourage everyone to go look at that. And the flexibility of our network, alongside the performance, alongside the privacy aspect, I think are three elements that are becoming increasingly important in the blockchain space. Because, I mean, clearly the technology always plays an important role, but also because when you think of how the industry evolves, assuming that we want to call blockchain an industry, and this is always something that I have mixed feelings, but let's consider blockchain an industry for a second. The way blockchain is evolving is really different every 6 months. So I know there is always a lot of hype around one project for 3 months to 6 months, and then like nothing after. And I think that has been one of the things that I really credit my team of, because we always have the courage to take a step back and build what makes sense rather than what's hot in that specific moment, even if sometimes that's not the most obvious thing to do. So why I'm saying this, because like the scalability that we achieve, and the flexibility of our network, again, with the performance that we offer and the privacy that we offer, I think are really the fundamental building blocks of the next generation of blockchain. So I really believe that component is extremely important for our network. Another thing that I want to mention is that the way we achieve like privacy, I try to make this easy, but we use the secure computation, these secure enclaves, which are these pieces of hardware where the computation lives, and they're very secure. They have some downsides too, but they're very secure, and they allow for this idea that the data can stay private while the computation can be executed. We reduce the reliance on Intel SGX, which is the manufacturer of this, by decentralizing a consensus layer on top, by adding a decentralized consensus layer on top. So you don't have to rely on one piece of hardware, but there is a network of those. So I think one of the things that we're really proud of is like the security and the network of validators that we were able to build. I mean, more information are very like public on our Medium blog post or our Block Explorer. So I don't want to go too much into that right now, but I think this is something worth checking, because the combination of all these elements together, I believe, makes our network extremely unique in the way we design the architecture for like keeping in mind the blockchain and non-blockchain developer that wants to build serious and credible applications that take blockchain to the next level, because use blockchain as an enabler for what they want to achieve.
Very cool. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing. So I think we got time for a couple more questions. One, what are the biggest problems that you see right now in DeFi, and how does Oasis fit into that? And I guess what is like the biggest privacy problem that maybe people don't realize in DeFi at the moment?
I think the part that people don't realize about privacy right now is that the lack of privacy on Ethereum is causing this like part of the community to get together to build products that take advantage of the inefficiencies of Ethereum, which is counterintuitive. And I think it was counterintuitive or kind of unexpected, let's say a year ago, when we started to take DeFi way more seriously than before. To be more specific, I think on the transaction side, the fact that the mempool is completely public, the fact that the transactions are public, and the fact that transaction fees are, I mean, the gas fee is also like public, it's causing essentially like in DeFi this weird situation where DeFi is not this product that is accessible by everyone, but actually is accessible by very few who can afford, more than can afford, I'd say, who can find a sense in paying these high fees when executing a trade, because it's worth like their time and money, right? Because they're able to deploy so much capital that they don't care about $200-300 fees for one transaction. Now, this is like we're seeing how some speculators are looking at the mempool, and then when there is something interesting, either they spam the mempool to raise the fees and make more money. And I think it's like traders, but it's often like validators or people who benefit from transaction fees, of course. But anyway, there is a subset of the community who is skewing the products towards making a lot of money for themselves, while excluding majority of the population from that. So the public mempool is, the visibility of the mempool is causing these incentives. The transaction fee, the data of the transaction, like being able to see the data of the transaction, is kind of pushing people to look at the transaction and then compete for higher gas fees to be first in line and execute the trade first. And this like idea of composability is also going into a direction that is different from what we thought a year ago. A year ago, we thought that you build a service, I build a service, these two services should talk together. Now is leaning towards, I want to build a service on you, I give you my money, you give me another token that I can bring somewhere. Like it's sort of like stacking different layers of incentives, which is nothing bad with that. I think the financial service has a lot of similarities with this, with the caveat that a lot of these protocols in the stack like are not necessarily audited, tested, and from credible developers. Like, I mean, you don't know, like you generally don't know, and they handle millions of dollars. And if one thing goes wrong, the entire stack falls. So you're exposing the entire industry to increasing level of risk. And again, there's nothing bad with that. It's just that, to me, the way I see this is that this is kind of going into the opposite direction from what the DeFi story was a year ago, which was like, let's create a financial services that is a financial system that it's accessible by everyone, to let's create a system for thousands that make a lot of money, but that's it. So I think privacy has a very important role there of creating a much better system on top of which applications can be built for real. That's the one aspect that I think goes unnoticed. On a more practical, like an aspirational point of view, I think lack of privacy in other chains is preventing large organizations from approaching DeFi or blockchain in general. Partially for the same answer that I gave at the beginning, which is you are large institutions, you really don't want to put like all your data there, right? You simply don't want like all your trades and all your, it doesn't take long to know who did what, right? So you don't want to do that. You don't want to be public. It's not public in the real world. I don't see why it should be public in blockchain. So that's another thing. And then this entire spectrum of how protocols can work more efficiently in presence if privacy was there. And I can think of even like versions of Uniswap or lending protocols or stable coins or oracles themselves, right? Like each of them presents a strong advantage because of privacy. So summing up what I said, first one, there's privacy can help with creating a better underlying system that doesn't create the right situation for people who want to take a very selfish incentive, financial incentive, like that blocks that aspect. The second one is from a more application standpoint, it can really create a generation of application that can strongly encourage participation of the masses. And then the sort of connector between these two elements is that it could help create this system where both miners and traders make money because of the participation of larger institutions via again adoption and increased usage of these platforms.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks a lot for sharing. Yeah. Is there anything else before we kind of go in and start wrapping it up a bit that maybe we left off that you want to talk about?
I think if I want to brag a little bit about our series of partnerships that we built, I really encourage people in this room to have a look at the ecosystem map that we build on our like Telegram channels and websites, etc. We are significantly expanding the level of communication that we are giving to the community. We acknowledge that we've been focused on developments before. The partners that we have and the ecosystem that we can count on has been extremely beneficial to the support of the development that we did, mainly because the ability of talking to both a strong network of investors, a strong ecosystem of partners, and a strong and growing community of users and stakeholders, I think has been an extremely valuable source of feedback that we want to keep fostering. Like Chainlink is an amazing partner, not just because of the functionalities that you guys enable, but also because of the conversation that we're able to have around what's going to happen tomorrow in blockchain. How do we best serve the need of the customers that haven't manifested needs so far, simply because maybe there is a risk profile that they want to take, or because there is a missing part of the building blocks that they need in order to think of phase 2, and so on and so forth. And that part, I think, has been even a notice of our network, and I encourage everyone to sort of get up to speed because there's a lot in there.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's been great working with your team, and yeah, really appreciate you taking the time and coming on here to share everything that you guys are working on. To kind of take it full circle, with the conversation that we kind of started with, and you're talking with your VP at Amex, what do you think he would say now, 5-6 years later, with all the progress that's been made? And if you don't want to answer that one, like what's one thing that you would tell him if you had the chance now?
So, I mean, the fun thing is that I don't even have to tell that person anything, because American Express itself has been investing a lot on blockchain, and that's for real. They have a super strong brand. They also have a super strong network of merchants. And the way to strengthen the relationship between American Express and this network of merchants is really like decentralization. And this has been extremely fun, because really, like, one of the things that blockchain is truly bringing, again, like, blockchain is often hyped for like money. There was ICO back in time, then it was fundraising maybe later, then it was yield farming, and then there was like crypto winter, crypto summer, and everything is related to like price and tokens. But there are so many aspects of blockchain that go unnoticed. One of them is cooperation, where cooperation does not exist. Think of every place where you have a network, you have a group of entities that share some properties that work vertically with one player. Let's say all the networks that accept Stripe, for instance, all the merchants that accept Stripe, for instance. That's a network that is not expressed as a network, because there is one company that is building an amazing product that everyone needs, that is serving the purpose. But let's imagine that instead of being one company there was something like blockchain or a decentralized company there. Immediately, this series of customers that work with one can become a network. And it's not a matter of transactionally consuming the service that the central company does, but it's mostly a matter of collaborating on dimensions that are additional on top of the main service that they're buying, right? So one of the things that I truly don't like is when blockchain is presented as there should be fairness in the market. There should be like, there should not be a central entity. That's, in my opinion, that's not true. Like, a central entity should be there if there is a benefit from a central benefit that everyone is benefiting from, right? The cool thing of blockchain is, what are the things that blockchain enables that central entity cannot enable by default or by design? That's the part that I'm extremely interested in. And so this is the part that I would go back and tell my VP and say, I wish I had the ability of seeing the future at the time and telling, like, you're wrong, not because this is a video game, not because there's no speculation there. You're right in this sense. It's possible that 70% of what you're saying, like, it's completely true. I'm not questioning that. But there is one aspect that you completely ignored that is the real benefit of that product. That's the one thing that I would do. And again, like, years later, completely different capacity and setup. That's exactly what we are building today. And that's exactly what we think should happen, like cooperation and coordination via data and via financial incentives, not just at protocol layer, but also at application layer. Because if you are offered some way to collaborate with company X, you are way more inclined to do that. And the relationship is much more straightforward. Companies don't have to hide cancellation or policies to get off that service like after 20 clicks. But it could be like, users can adopt that service because they know there's trust. They can benefit from that. The company can benefit from that because there is a good relationship with their customer, and that's it. And you can really like enable that type of cooperation. And that's what we're trying to build at Oasis.
Awesome. No, I love that answer, and very well thought out. Thank you for that. No, that was just thrown on you. Yeah, so really appreciate you being on here, Luca. If people want to follow your progress, where's the best, like, website, Twitter, and your own, for people to join the Oasis community?
Yeah, definitely. I think we are converging towards Telegram. I think that's the place where we are like pushing towards. And from there, we're gonna post like Medium blog posts. There's gonna be a ton of announcements in the next weeks, and I really say a ton of announcements because we have our mainnet beta, we have some grants program that we will be announcing, we have the partners that we'll be announcing, we have some community focused activities to explain what we do and to like encourage participation on our network. There are more and more articles coming up around what we're doing with enterprises. Let's not forget that that's still a big chunk of what we do. Yeah, definitely, like Telegram is the one source where we like group everything, but I encourage to read what we're doing because I deem it extremely exciting, and I hope the community is gonna think the same.
Very
And
cool.
my personal, I mean, clearly we have like company Twitter. I also post stuff on my personal Twitter. So like classic channels, we're not reinventing the wheel there.
Great. Yeah. I'll make sure to drop those links for everyone in the description. It should be ready in a few hours. Is Oasis Labs, I know a lot of people are really interested in what you're doing. Are you guys hiring or looking for other people to join your team?
So I'd say we are always on the hunt for good people. Our main launch is coming up, and definitely that is taking a lot of our time right now, as you can imagine. But definitely, as soon as that part is done, like a complete new chapter of our life is going to open up. And so for sure, so every time there is some level of interest, I love when people have ideas. If it's not direct hiring, we have a grants program in place, and we would love to support the development that way. Sometimes it's even better because you could have higher flexibility to actually build what you want. So we noticed that some of the people we were talking to bring them in told us that, "Well, you know what, I'm going to build my own project, maybe help us build it." Yeah.
Very cool. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time. This was a lot of fun and very interesting, and learned a lot speaking with you. So really want to thank you. Really want to thank the Chainlink community and the Oasis community for joining us today, and really looking forward to seeing your progress.
Thank you. Thanks a lot to you and to Chainlink for having hosted that. It's an amazing collaboration that we have. We're very proud of that.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's been great work with you too. So appreciate it, and have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you. You too.